Poland, September 1939. Private Heinrich Mauer was declared dead at 14:40 hours. He walked back into camp at 14:47. Nobody could explain the 47 minutes. Heinrich couldn't either, but something could. The field report was straightforward. Mauer had taken a direct hit during the advance on Warsaw. The medic confirmed no pulse. The body was marked for collection. Standard procedure. What was not standard? 47 minutes later, Mauer walked unaided into the field command tent, sat down in a chair, and asked for water. He had no wounds, no blood on his uniform, no explanation. The commanding officer, Oberst Dietrich Krane, initially assumed a clerical error, a misidentification in the chaos of the advance. He ordered a medical examination. The physician found nothing wrong with Mauer. Perfect health, perfect vitals. One anomaly? Mauer's body temperature was 34.1 degrees Celsius. Slightly low, but not alarmingly so.
Krane filed a report. The report was intercepted before it reached Berlin. It was redirected instead to a department that did not appear on any official military organizational chart. A department whose letterhead carried only 2 words and a symbol. The 2 words were Nachtseele, night soul. The symbol was a circle with a line through its center. Mauer was transferred within 48 hours. His unit was told he had been reassigned. 3 members of his unit who had witnessed his return were also transferred, separately, to different postings within the week. None of them ever made contact with each other again. Krane kept a copy of his original report. He hid it inside the lining of his coat. He spent the rest of the war trying to understand what he had seen. He never did. But 23 years later, his daughter found the report, and she understood immediately, because she had seen the symbol before, in a photograph from a dig site in Egypt, dated 1334 BC.
In 1938, Heinrich Himmler sent a 5-man expedition to Tibet to find evidence of Aryan origins. They found something. It wasn't evidence, and it wasn't staying in Tibet. The Ahnenerbe, the SS institute dedicated to researching the occult, racial history, and what Himmler called the ancestral heritage of the German people, operated with a budget, a staff of scientists, and a mandate that would have seemed insane in any other context. In any other context. The 1938 Tibet expedition, led by zoologist Ernst Schaefer, was officially tasked with gathering anthropological measurements, flora samples, and evidence supporting the theory of a prehistoric Aryan civilization in the Himalayas. Schaefer's official report, submitted to Berlin in 1939, described a successful scientific mission. Measurements taken, samples collected, hypotheses partially supported. His personal journal, recovered from his home in Bavaria in 1997, described something else entirely. On the 31st day of the expedition, at altitude, in a location Schaefer recorded only as the eastern approach, below the 3rd ridge, the team found a structure. Not a cave, a structure. Cut stone, deliberate construction, sealed with a method Schaefer's engineer could not identify. They opened it anyway. Schaefer wrote that what they found inside was not archaeological. It was not a relic or an artifact. It was, in his words, a presence, a residency, something that had been placed there intentionally, not buried, but housed. He wrote that he could not describe it physically because looking at it directly was not possible. Not painful, simply not possible, as if the eyes refused the information. What he could describe was this. All 5 expedition members heard it speak. Not in Tibetan, not in German. In each man's native language simultaneously, though they came from 4 different countries. It said one thing, the same thing to all 5 of them. I have been waiting for someone to remember where I was.
Herr Doktor.
Schaefer returned to Germany and submitted his sanitized report. 3 weeks later, Himmler personally created the Nachtsheele division. The Tibet location was listed as the project's point of origin. The thing in the sealed chamber was listed in one document as the consultant.
Allied intelligence identified 116 major Nazi research facilities by 1943. Bunker 117 was found by accident, by a German supply driver who took a wrong turn and never reported for his next shift. The supply manifest that led British intelligence to Bunker 117 was discovered not through espionage, but through a filing error. A requisition for materials, steel, concrete, specialized ventilation equipment, and 40 tons of lead sheeting had been incorrectly routed through a civilian supply chain, where a sharp-eyed administrator in a Munich procurement office noticed it was addressed to a location that did not correspond to any military installation she could identify. She flagged it. It was suppressed, but she had already made a copy. British intelligence received the copy in late 1943 through a contact in the German resistance. What it described was a facility of considerable size, built into a hillside in the Thuringian forest, consuming resources that suggested it was not a standard research installation. The lead sheeting was what caught the analyst's attention. Standard facilities did not require lead-lined rooms. Lead-lined rooms suggested either radiation or, and the analyst noted this as an afterthought, though it proved correct, acoustic containment, an attempt to prevent something from being heard.
Or to prevent something from hearing out. A reconnaissance flight was dispatched. The photographs showed nothing. Forest, hillside, unremarkable terrain. No structures visible from the air. The analyst noted this in her report. A facility consuming that volume of material should be visible from altitude. The fact that it was not suggested either exceptional concealment or that it had been built entirely underground. She recommended ground investigation. The recommendation was filed. No mission was authorized. 3 months later, a German supply driver named Otto Frick failed to report for his shift at a depot in Weimar. His supervisor noted the absence. His truck was found 3 days later, parked on a forest road in the Thuringian Hills, engine still running, door open. Frick was never found. But in the cab of his truck, British intelligence, who had quietly flagged all supply routes in the region, found a piece of paper. On it, in handwriting that appeared to have been written in extreme haste, were 2 lines. It is underground. It is not a laboratory.
British intelligence sent a 4-man team anyway. 2 came back. One of those 2 was institutionalized within the week. The other wrote a 40-page report that was immediately classified at the highest level. The classification has never been lifted. The report is listed in the National Archive Index. The file itself is listed as not present. Location unconfirmed. Dr. Elias Weiss was one of Germany's most gifted physicists. He was also Jewish, which made his conscription into Nachtsheele either a desperate measure or a deliberate one. He believed it was deliberate. He believed they needed him specifically. Weiss was taken from Dachau in November 1942. He was not told where he was going. He was given clean clothes, a meal, and escorted to a vehicle with blacked-out windows. He arrived at a facility he would later describe only as underground, cold, and wrong, as if the air itself was reluctant. The work he was asked to do was not physics. Not exactly. It was physics applied to a problem that had no business being a physics problem. How to measure, quantify, and interact with something that existed partially outside the physical spectrum. The Nachtsheele scientists had a subject. They would not let Weiss see it directly. He worked from readings. instruments measuring electromagnetic fluctuation, atmospheric pressure changes, acoustic anomalies, all registering the presence of something in a sealed chamber 3 levels below his laboratory. The readings were impossible, not difficult to explain, impossible. They described a behavior that violated conservation energy. They described a presence that consumed measurable quantities of electromagnetic radiation without producing any corresponding output. In physics terms, something that ate light and gave nothing back.
Weiss worked for 6 months. He developed a theoretical framework. He designed an instrument, what he called a resonance bridge, that he believed could establish bidirectional communication with the subject. He was not allowed to operate it himself. 2 SS officers ran the experiment, while Weiss monitored from an adjacent room through a reinforced window. The experiment ran for 11 seconds. At second 4, both officers stopped moving. At second 7, every instrument in Weiss's room flatlined simultaneously. At second 9, Weiss heard something through the reinforced glass that he would spend the rest of his life trying to describe. His closest attempt, written in a memoir he never published, it was not a sound. It was the memory of a sound, as if something very old was reminding the air of a frequency it had forgotten. At second 11, the officers resumed moving. They shut down the equipment. They escorted Weiss back to his quarters without speaking. He never saw either officer again. But that night, alone in his quarters, Weiss noticed something on the wall, scratched into the plaster at eye height, in a location he was certain had been blank that morning, was a symbol. He had seen it before, in a physics textbook, as a footnote, attributed to no known language, described only as recurring motif, origin undetermined, found at sites including Thebes, Delphi, Rome, and Sybaris. Weiss survived the war. He immigrated to the United States in 1946. He spent 30 years at a university in Massachusetts, teaching introductory physics and never publishing research. When he died in 1978, his office contained one item of note, a single photograph pinned above his desk of the symbol on the wall. Beneath it, in his handwriting, it knew I would find it. It left it for me specifically. I do not know what this means. I am afraid I do.
The SS officer who started asking questions. Hauptsturmfuhrer Karl Brenner was selected for Nachtseele because he never asked questions. By 1943, he had filled 11 notebooks with them. Brenner's selection criteria, as documented in his personnel file, were specific: disciplined, ideologically reliable, psychologically stable, incurious. The last quality was underlined. Nachtseele, the file noted, required men who would observe without interpreting, who would follow protocol without questioning it, who would work in proximity to the subject without attempting to engage with it. Brenner lasted 8 months before the notebooks began. His first questions were operational, gaps in procedure he couldn't reconcile. Why did protocol require workers to be rotated out of the lower levels every 6 hours? Why were mirrors prohibited in the facility? Why did the supply manifest include, among standard provisions, a recurring monthly order for 200 kilograms of salt, not for food, but delivered directly to the chamber level? His later questions were different. Why had 4 of his colleagues, rotated out of the facility after extended service, been reported dead within a year? 3 by suicide, 1 in circumstances described only as unexplained in the casualty record.
Why did the night shift workers universally report the same dream? Not similar dreams, the same dream, with identical details, verified when Brenner quietly compared accounts without telling the subjects why he was asking. In the dream, a long corridor,
a door at the end. The door is open. Something on the other side is not visible, but is aware, specifically, individually aware of the dreamer. It says one thing. You already know what I am. You have always known. The word is in every language. It is the first word. Brenner's 11th notebook ended mid-sentence. The final entry was a single question, written and then crossed out 3 times before he let it stand. What if it is not here because we found it? What if we built this facility in the location where it already was, without knowing? Brenner disappeared from Nachtseele records in October 1943. He was not listed as transferred, discharged, or deceased. He was simply absent from 1 month's roster and never mentioned again. His 11 notebooks were found in 2003, bricked into a wall of a farmhouse in Thuringia. The farmhouse was built in 1944.
The Children of Village 12. There was a village 3 kilometers from Bunker 117 that does not appear on any wartime map. The villagers knew the facility was there. They had known something was there long before the Nazis arrived. They called it, in the local dialect, the Old Tenant. The village had no official name in German records. Local historians, working from pre-war Thuringian regional documents, refer to it as Dorf Zwölf, Village 12, a designation from an older administrative system. The village had been continuously inhabited since at least the 13th century, possibly longer. The oldest structures showed foundations built on top of older foundations, layers of habitation going back to a period before written local records. The villagers had a tradition. Every generation, the eldest family in the village would designate one member as the Vector, the Watcher. The Watcher's role was not explained in any document that survived the war. It was passed down orally. What is known is this. When the SS arrived to begin construction of the facility in 1941, the village elder, a woman named Greta Holtzmann, then 74 years old, walked to the commanding officer and told him, through her granddaughter who translated from the dialect, 3 things. First, you are building in the wrong place. Not the wrong location, the wrong configuration. The entrance must not face east. Second, the workers must be rotated. No individual should spend more than 6 hours at depth. This is not preference. This is requirement. Third, whatever you find below the 3rd level of excavation, do not speak to it. It will answer. The answer is the danger, not the asking. The officer listened politely. He noted the conversation in his log with the annotation, "Local superstition, disregard." The facility was built with its primary entrance facing east. Workers were not rotated for the first 3 months. And on the day the excavation reached the 3rd level, the lead engineer reported hearing distinctly a response to a question no one had asked aloud. He was rotated out the following morning. The rotation protocol, identical to what Holtzmann had specified, was implemented facility-wide by the end of the week. The commanding officer did not note the connection in any subsequent report. Greta Holtzmann died in 1943, 8 months after the facility became operational. Her granddaughter, who had served as translator, left the village the same day and was never traced. Before she left, she visited every family in the village and told them one thing: leave before winter. Most did not. The village was found empty in January 1944. No evacuation order had been issued. No military action had taken place in the area. What the Allied soldiers found in the forest. April 1945. The war was ending. American soldiers advancing through the Thuringian forest were told to watch for German resistance. They found something that had not been German and had not been resisting. Sergeant First Class Robert Aldous, 3rd Infantry Division, recorded the discovery in his personal diary, a diary he maintained throughout the European campaign, and which his family donated to a university archive in 1989. His entry for April 11th, 1945, reads with the careful precision of a man trying to describe something his vocabulary was not designed to contain. The patrol had been following a forest track when they found the entrance, a concrete structure, partially concealed by vegetation that had been deliberately trained over it, with a heavy steel door standing open. The door was open from the inside, Aldous wrote. You could tell by the direction of the hinges. Whatever had last used that door had left from the inside, going out. But there was no one in the forest. We had come from the west. There was nowhere to go east. The front was there. They went in. The facility was abandoned. Equipment left mid-operation in some areas. Dials still set, papers still on desks, meals on tables in the canteen at a stage of consumption that suggested they had been left mid-bite. No bodies, no personnel, no sign of organized evacuation. It looked, Aldous wrote, like the rapture, if the rapture had happened to people who deserved it. They went deeper. At the 3rd level below ground, they found the chamber. The door was open, again from the inside. The room was empty, but the walls had been treated, lined with lead sheeting, bolted at intervals, floor to ceiling. In the center of the floor, a circle, inscribed in what the army later confirmed was not paint. At the top of the circle, a symbol Aldous sketched in his diary. He was not an educated man, and he noted he had never studied history or ancient languages. He also noted that when he saw the symbol, he understood it immediately, without thinking about it, without translation. It means occupied, he wrote, like a sign on a door. This room was occupied. Whatever occupied it has checked out. I do not think it checked out because the war ended. I think it checked out because it was finished here. The Nuremberg trials documented Nazi atrocities with meticulous precision. One witness's testimony was stricken from the official record on the 2nd day. The reason given was irrelevance. The actual reason was something the tribunal was not prepared to enter into the historical record. The witness was Dr. Frieda Sachse, a physicist who had worked at a Nachtseele adjacent facility. Not Bunker 117 itself, but a secondary site in Austria, where data from the primary location was analyzed. Her testimony began conventionally. Dates, locations, descriptions of her role. Then, at the point where she began describing the nature of the research, the presiding judge interrupted to ask her to clarify what she meant by the subject. Sachse clarified. The transcript of the next 4 minutes of testimony was stricken from the official record. What remains in the transcript is the judge's instruction to strike it, and then a gap, and then his instruction to the witness to confine herself to matters relevant to charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Sachse completed her testimony on other matters. She was not called again. 3 journalists present in the courtroom that day recorded their own notes of the stricken testimony. 2 of those journalists subsequently published nothing about what they had heard. The third, a woman named Clara Heinz, working for a Swiss newspaper, filed a report. Her editor killed it. She kept her notes. Her notes describe Sachse's testimony in summary. The Nachtsee program had not created anything. It had located something pre-existing, something that had been present at the site, at the specific coordinates, for a period that the program's own geological analysis had estimated at a minimum of several thousand years. The Nazis had not brought it there, they had found it there. They had attempted to weaponize it. Sachse's testimony, according to Heinz's notes, described what happened when the weaponization attempt reached its final stage. The experiment Weiss had monitored, the 11 seconds, the 2 officers. What the officers did after the experiment was concluded, what they did before they were removed from the facility, and what they said in the hours between, in a language that none of the witnesses recognized, but that all of them understood perfectly. Clara Heinz's notes break off mid-description of what the officer said. The remaining pages of her notebook, 7 pages, are blank. Not torn out, not redacted. Blank, as if they were never written on. But the indentations of writing are present on the pages beneath. Whatever was written on those 7 pages was removed without removing the paper. 17 years after the war ended, a geological survey team in the Thuringian forest detected an anomalous signal from underground. It was not geological. It was structured. And it was new. It had not been present on the same survey conducted in 1958. The 1962 survey was routine, part of a West German government program to map subsurface geology across the region. The team was civilian, academic, entirely unconnected to any intelligence apparatus. Their instruments detected the signal on the 4th day of the survey. The lead geologist, Dr. Hans Pfeiffer, described it in his field notes as rhythmic electromagnetic fluctuation, non-random, originating from approximately 40 meters below surface, in a location showing no natural geological feature that could account for it. He noted the location's coordinates. He noted that a 1958 survey of the same area had shown nothing anomalous. He filed his report. Within 2 weeks, the survey program was quietly defunded. Pfeiffer was informed that budget constraints required the team to be dissolved. He was offered a position at a university in Hamburg, in a department unrelated to geology. He accepted it. But first, he went back to the coordinates. He brought 2 colleagues. They brought instruments. They spent a day at the location, recording. The signal was stronger than it had been 4 days earlier. It was also more structured. Pfeiffer, who had a secondary interest in acoustics, noted that the pattern bore resemblance to, though was not identical to, human language rhythm. Specifically, it resembled the rhythm of a question, repeated. The same question, over and over, from 40 meters underground. Pfeiffer could not determine what the question was, but he could determine when the signal had started. Based on the 1958 survey baseline, the signal had begun sometime in the 4 years between 1958 and 1962. Specifically, and he noted this was likely coincidence, the signal appeared to have begun in April 1945.
The month the Allied soldiers had found the facility, the month whatever had been housed there had apparently left. Pfeiffer's private conclusion, written in his personal notes and never published, it did not leave. It went deeper. It is still here. And now it is asking something. I believe it is asking if anyone can hear it. Pfeiffer's 3 recordings from the return visit were confiscated by federal authorities within 48 hours. He was told they contained sensitive geological data. He was also told by the official who collected them that he should not return to the area. The official then said something Pfeiffer recorded verbatim because it made no sense. It is aware of you now. That is not a good development. For you or for it. In 1987, a historian named Dr. Anna Krane, granddaughter of Oberst Dietrich Krane, the officer who filed the first report about Private Mauer in 1939, published a paper connecting 12 historical incidents across 3 continents. The paper was in a respected academic journal. It was cited once by a reviewer who called it imaginative. Then it was forgotten. Dr. Krane was not surprised. She had expected this. The paper was titled Recurring Anomalies in Historical Incident Records, a proposed framework for classifying non-standard events. It was, by design, as dry as its title suggested. Beneath the academic language, it documented the following. A symbol appearing at 12 locations across recorded history. Egypt, 1334 BC. Delphi, Greece, 5th century BC. Sybaris, 510 BC. Rome, 1st century AD. Tibet,
1938, an unnamed Thuringian facility, 1942 to 1945, and 6 additional sites across Europe, Asia, and North America, spanning from the 3rd century BC to 1962. At each site, an anomalous event. At each site, a documented attempt by the relevant authority to contain or utilize whatever had caused the event. At each site, failure. At each site, the symbol.
Crane's paper proposed that these were not separate incidents, that they represented encounters with a single phenomenon, something that moved, that persisted, that interacted with whatever civilization found it, and that had been doing so for at minimum 3,000 years. She did not speculate about what the phenomenon was. The paper's conclusion was careful, measured, deliberately undramatic. The consistency of the symbol across cultures with no known contact with each other suggests either a shared archetype of remarkable specificity or a shared encounter with a consistent external stimulus. Further research is recommended. No further research was funded. Krane had expected this too. What she had not expected was the letter. It arrived 3 weeks after publication, postmarked from a town in Massachusetts. No return address. Inside, a single page, handwritten, in the careful script of an elderly person. It read, "Your paper is correct in every particular. I worked with it for 6 months in 1942-43. I can tell you what the symbol means. I can tell you what it is. I can tell you why it moves. I would like to do this in person. I am 87 years old, and I do not have long. My name is Elias Weiss." The letter was 11 pages. Krane read it in Weiss's apartment, sitting at his desk, beneath the photograph of the symbol. She read it once. Then she sat for 3 hours without moving. Then she read it again. The letter began, "I have been trying to write this for 40 years. Every time I begin, I stop, because I do not know what telling you will accomplish. Now I am 87, and I have decided that the danger of telling you is less than the danger of no one knowing. I may be wrong about this. You will have to judge." What followed was a complete account of his time at NACHTSEELE. The experiment, the 11 seconds, the 2 officers, what they did and said in the hours before they were removed. Then, something he had never written before. What happened on the night the facility was evacuated? He had not been evacuated. He had hidden. In a storage room on the 2nd level. In the panicked hours of April 1945, when the German personnel had fled without accounting for every individual. He had heard the evacuation. He had heard something else. From below, the sound of the chamber door opening. The same sound Weiss had memorized over months of proximity. A specific resonance from the lead-lined door on its hinges. Then, footsteps. Coming up. Weiss had stayed still in the storage room. The footsteps had passed his door. Paused. Continued toward the surface. Then, silence. Weiss had waited 4 hours before emerging. He had gone down to the 3rd level. The chamber was empty. The circle on the floor was intact. The symbol above the door was intact. But in the center of the circle, where nothing had been before, was a folded piece of paper. On the paper, in Weiss's own handwriting he recognized as his own, that replicated exactly his own particular letter formations, was a single sentence. He had not written it. He had never been in the chamber. The chamber had been sealed with a lock that required 2 keys simultaneously, and Weiss had neither. The sentence read, "Thank you for the resonance bridge. I would not have known how to leave without it."
the letter's final line. The instrument I built, the resonance bridge, I designed it to communicate with it. What I did not understand, and understand now, is that communication works both ways. It did not learn how to talk to us. It learned how to leave. I built it a door. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Find the notebooks, Brenner's notebooks. He knew where it was going. Krane found the notebooks. It took her 4 years. They were exactly where Weiss's letter had said they would be, inside a wall of a farmhouse in Thuringia. The farmhouse owner had no idea they were there. Neither did the wall, until Krane knocked on it and heard the hollow space. 11 notebooks, dense, small handwriting in black ink, dated from 1942 to October 1943, the month Brenner disappeared from Nachtseele records. Krane had them translated. Brenner's handwriting was archaic in style, difficult for a modern reader. She worked with a colleague in Berlin who did not know the source material, and who, Krane noted, became increasingly reluctant to continue the translation as the notebooks progressed. The colleague completed the translation. She then asked Krane once what the notebooks were. Krane told her they were a wartime journal. The colleague nodded. She did not ask again. She also, Krane noted, moved apartments within the month. She did not explain why. The notebooks contained everything Brenner had observed and questioned. Krane had read versions of some of it elsewhere, but the 11th notebook was new. In it, Brenner had mapped movement. He had cross-referenced every anomalous incident he could find in historical records with geographic coordinates. He had plotted them. He had identified a pattern, not random dispersal, but directed movement. The phenomenon had been moving consistently in one direction across documented history. West. Always west. Slowly, over centuries, then faster. Brenner had extrapolated the trajectory. He had calculated, with the materials available to him in 1943, where the trajectory pointed, where the phenomenon would be if it continued at its observed pace by the latter half of the 20th century. His calculation pointed to a city, a specific city, on the eastern seaboard of the United States. He had circled it on a hand-drawn map inside the back cover of the 11th notebook. The city was Boston. Beneath the circle, in handwriting that appeared to have been added later, more hurried, less careful, was a note. This is where it is going. I do not know if it is going there or if it is being drawn there. I do not know what is in Boston that it wants, but I believe someone already there will know. I believe it has already made contact. I believe the contact was made before I was born. The university in Massachusetts, where Weiss had taught for 30 years, had one other notable long-term faculty member, a professor of ancient languages named Dr. Edmund Carver, who had joined the faculty in 1919 and retired in 1971. Colleagues noted in departmental histories that he had appeared to age very little across that 52-year period. This was noted as a charming idiosyncrasy. Nobody looked any closer. Krane looked closer. Carver was easy to find in the historical record. 52 years at the same institution generates significant documentation. Photographs, departmental minutes, student records. Krane worked backward from his 1971 retirement. The photographs were the first confirmation. Carver in 1919, a man who appeared to be in his mid-40s. Carver in 1971, a man who appeared to be in his mid-50s. The difference across 5 decades was a decade's apparent aging, not the expected 50 years. Student records showed consistent reports across the decades. A professor described as brilliant, unsettling, and possessed of an uncanny ability to know things he should not know. A student's letter from 1931 described a seminar in which Carver translated an unknown inscription that a visiting archaeologist had brought in without any apparent reference material, without hesitation. The archaeologist had asked where Carver had learned the language. Carver had said pleasantly that he had not learned it. He simply knew it.
His academic specialty? Ancient languages with anomalous distribution patterns, specifically languages or symbols that appeared across multiple cultures with no known point of cultural contact. Specifically, the symbol. Carver had published, in 1923, a monograph on the symbol. The monograph was in the university library. Krane requested it. The librarian found it on the shelf, handed it over, and then stood at the desk looking faintly puzzled, as if she could not quite remember how she had found it so quickly. The monograph's title, On a Recurring Ideographic Form and Its Possible Implications for Pre-Migration Contact Theory. The monograph's conclusion, this symbol does not belong to any known civilization. It predates every culture in which it has been found. It is not a product of human communication. It is a product of something communicating with humans. I do not speculate further, as I do not wish to do so in print. Those who require further clarification may contact me directly.
At the bottom of the conclusion, in the original 1923 print, someone had written in ink, by hand, in the margins, a single line. The handwriting was Weiss's. Krane recognized it from the letter. The line read, "He knows what it is. He will not say. I think he cannot say, not because he is unwilling, but because it told him not to." Krane found Carver. He was 127 years old by her calculation, living in a care facility outside Boston, listed in the records as 94. He was alert. He was expecting her. When she sat down across from him, the first thing he said was, "You have the notebooks. Good. Now I can tell you the part that Brenner did not know, the part about why it came here, and what it has been building in this city for the last 80 years. The conversation lasted 4 hours. Krane recorded it. She has never played the recording back. She transcribed it from memory immediately after because she could not bring herself to hear his voice again, saying those things in that order. Carver had first encountered the phenomenon in 1907 during a research trip to Greece, specifically to the ruins of Delphi. He had been 23. He had been examining an inscription in the inner sanctum when he became aware that something was aware of him. Not threatening, not malevolent, patient. It had communicated with him over several weeks, not in words at first, in understanding. Concepts deposited directly into his comprehension, as if placed there by careful hands. What he understood across those weeks, the phenomenon was not an entity in any sense he had a framework for. It was, the closest Carver could come in their 4-hour conversation, a concentration, a point where something that existed across and between all things had accumulated density, the way a whirlpool is not a thing, but a behavior of water. It had no intent, as humans understood intent. It had orientation. It moved towards certain conditions and away from others. What it moved toward? Complexity, concentration, the density of human thought and activity. It was drawn to cities the way water is drawn downhill, not choosing, but following the gradient. Boston, in the latter 20th century, was one of the densest concentrations of human intellectual activity on Earth. Universities, research institutions, medical facilities. It had been moving toward this concentration for centuries. What was it doing there? Krane asked. Carver looked at her with an expression she described in her transcript as not unkind. Nothing, he said. The same thing a river does when it reaches the sea. It arrives. It is simply there. The question you want to ask is not what it is doing. The question is what it has already done, in the people it has passed through, in the ones who encountered it and carried something back. Schaefer, Weiss, Brenner, the soldiers, the oracles, the priests. Krane asked what it had done to them. Left traces, Carver said. The way a river leaves silt. It passed through them and left a little of itself behind. Over enough generations, over enough individuals, the traces accumulate. He paused. "Dr. Krane," he said, "how did you find Brenner's notebooks? Specifically, how did you know to knock on that particular wall?" Krane stopped transcribing at this point in the conversation. The transcript has a gap of approximately 10 minutes before it resumes. When it resumes, Carver is mid-sentence. "Which is why I need you to understand that your finding me was not research. It was not coincidence. It was the trace in you, recognizing the trace in me. Your grandfather filed that report in 1939. The thing Mauer brought back with him, a trace of contact, your grandfather was exposed to it. You inherited something, Dr. Krane. You have always known where to look. You simply did not know that you knew."
What is already in us? This is the last chapter. It is also the first chapter, if you are the kind of person who will now go back to the beginning and read everything again, differently. Most people are, after this. It is one of the traces it leaves. Krane published nothing. She returned to her university. She taught her courses. She corresponded occasionally with Carver until his death in 1997, officially listed as occurring at age 120, which the care facility noted with modest pride as an institutional record. Krane did not correct the figure. She kept the notebooks. She kept the recording she never played back. She kept Weiss's letter and her transcript of Carver's conversation, and the photograph from above Weiss's desk, and her own notes. All of it in a fireproof box in her office, under her desk. She told one person, a doctoral student she trusted in 2001, who was writing a dissertation on anomalous cross-cultural symbols.
Read it
She
all
handed the
before
student
you
the
ask
box
me
and said,
anything.
"Read it all before you ask me anything." The student read it all. She came back the following day with one question. "The symbol," she said. "I've been drawing it since I started
What
reading.
does it mean?
I didn't notice it first. I've been drawing it on the margins of everything." Krane nodded. "I know," she said. "I did too. Still do sometimes. It's not harmful. It's just residue. Recognition. Part of you has always known it. Most of us have traces. Most of us are descended from someone who encountered it somewhere, in some century. It has been moving through human populations for 3,000 years. The math is not in our favor." The student looked at the symbol she had drawn in the margin of her notepad. She looked at it for a long time. "What does it mean?" she asked. "Actually mean?" Krane had asked Carver this. Carver had asked it directly in 1907 at Delphi. He had received an answer he said took him 10 years to accept. "It isn't a word," Krane said. "It isn't a warning or a name or a message. It's what Carver called a flag, a marker, the thing it leaves behind when it passes through a place or a person, the equivalent of a thumbprint." She paused. "It doesn't mean anything," she said. "It just means I was here." The student looked at the symbol in the margin of her notepad for a long time. Then she looked up. "Then why?" she said slowly. "Does looking at it feel like looking in a mirror?" Krane had no answer for that. She had been asking herself the same question for 20 years. She suspected the answer had been inside her since before she was born, carried in from her grandfather's exposure to a soldier who had died and returned in 47 minutes in September 1939, passed down through a generation she had never met, waiting, patient and unhurried, in the way that things wait when they are very old and entirely certain that eventually the right person will find the right question. She picked up her pen. Without thinking about it, without noticing, she began to draw the symbol in the margin of her notepad. She had done this every day for 20 years.
she no longer found it disturbing. That, she had come to understand, was the most disturbing thing of all.
You have read this story. You know the symbol now. You have seen it described in enough detail, in enough contexts, that some part of your mind has assembled it. Tonight, or tomorrow, or in a week, you may find yourself drawing it without knowing why. If you do, it is not this story that put it there. This story only reminded you. It has been in you longer than you know. We all carry traces. The only question is, how long the thing that left them has been watching us carry them.